Well, good afternoon. That was a wonderful presentation from our cousins in Newfoundland. And that's going to be great. Maybe we can talk about some co-marketing of some things. I'm going to kind of keep on the Atlantic Canadian theme of things, to talk to you about one that's been around for a bit now. And part of talking about the Celtic Colors International Festival, I'm going to give you some history that if we were starting it again today, the context is different. The environmental conditions are different, and we might do it differently. But the environmental conditions wouldn't have been different if we hadn't done it the way we did. Does that make sense? Okay. I need to start by telling you a little bit about Cape Breton University. Small university, has a graduate program called an MBA in Community Economic Development, which tells you something about the orientation of the institution, which was set up in part by a federal government development agency. In fact, people on the mainland, when it was first set up, kept calling it DevCo University with a sneer on their faces. So we've had a long history of community development. And one of those things that's part of it, and I'm going to remark on it because Ivan particularly mentioned it, the traditional tensions between conservative academia and people who try to do it differently have always been a part of the tension within our institution as well. But having said that, well, there's always been a lot of outreach. And the outreach has included embedding people in organizations, sort of like sleepers back in the days of the Russians in the US, who are helping to facilitate things in an action research kind of way. So we have over the years, for example, established a group that some of you may have heard of, New Dawn Enterprises. Okay. The university also established the BCA Community Development Fund. We started with about 12 high-tech companies that we helped bring into existence and mentor in the 1990s, mid-1990s. 10 of them are still alive and kicking. 2 of them are kicking very well internationally, but they're all still in Cape Breton. And with the Celtic Colors International Festival, among other things, we are also highly embedded. I should recognize, by the way, that one of our students is in the room, and that's Brant Satterberg. Because one of the things about the MBA and CED is we have about 200 students in that program, but we go across the country and teach in the communities where they live. They may come for a summer course or something like that, but the rest of the time we're carrying the program to them. We also now have started at our campus in Cairo and in partnership with an Indian university. And we have a first cohort starting quite shortly. The Celtic Colors International Festival in Cape Breton. Well, Cape Breton 15 years ago, the festival's been around for 14 years, was in a fairly difficult situation. The whole island was. Coal and steel were dying. It was only a question of how many years more we could stretch out the government grants. And that was a huge problem because of the culture of entitlement, because government had been involved with those industries since the 1960s. So, they owned my job, right? And there was also a culture of great negativity, and there's a population issue on the island in the sense that we are about 94% Caucasian, most of whom are Celtic, largely Scottish, some Irish, Acadian. Those Acadians are Celts too. There's a few Welsh people and Cornish people. And nobody likes to fight with their neighbor more than a Celt does. So we have a long, long history of eating each other's lunch. If you started something somewhere, pretty soon your neighbors down the road, 10 kilometers, are doing the same thing on the same day because the dollar they got in their pockets, what's it talking about mine? There was a fixed pie kind of mentality. It hasn't totally disappeared, but it's disappeared to a very great extent. And the festival takes some credit for that, as I'll tell you as we go along. We've lost 16% of the island's population since 1986, which is a significant out-migration. We also have a large proportion of migrant workers on the island. Now, those aren't Mexicans who are coming in. Those are Cape Bretoners who go out. Newfoundland knows that story. We have every Monday morning 1 or 2 big chartered jets at the Sydney airport, the Fort McMurray Express. And there are about 2,000 people in Cape Breton who go to Fort Mac and to the mines out in the Northwest Territories and so on. And they do work 12 hours a day for so many weeks, come home for a couple of weeks. Yeah, there are Cape Bretoners, just as there are Newfoundlanders, who moved out there. Most of them don't like it. There are a few who like it, most of them don't. So every July 1st, the island sinks about 6 inches because all those capers are coming home for the summer holidays. And for a couple of weeks, all the grocery stores have been having sales on turkey because when they come, they're going to mooch off their relatives. And turkey's the cheapest thing you can feed them. So we've got a summer kind of culture. I don't know what you feed them in Newfoundland. We feed them turkey. Okay, the other thing I will say about the paper is it's very much written for practitioners. Because the frustrating thing about case studies, I find, is you get just enough detail to be interested, but there's not enough how-to. So it's long, but it's also dense, but hopefully it's written in mostly plain English, because I want you to understand what some of the context was of what we did, because some of it might work for you and some of it might not. The festival, as I say, has been around for 14 years. The next slide we're going to have to skip over because we had a little Mac PC problem. That was to be a lovely map of Cape Breton, and I was going to show you about it. But let's go straight to the Celtic Colors Festival here. It's been around since 1997, and what it is a 9-day festival that begins always on Friday night of the Thanksgiving weekend, and it has grown over the years considerably. I have a few stats within the paper, but we, for example, started in 1997 with, I think it was 27 concerts. We're now up to about 45 annually. I don't have ticket sale figures from the very earliest years because we weren't keeping good enough data at that time. But now we sell about 18,000 to 20,000 tickets a year to those various concerts. But the concerts are only the start. We have a whole series of community events that also take place, and that's what has really grown in the last 3 years or so. They've about tripled to where now we have approximately 280 days of community events crammed into that 9-day period. So you can do anything from take a fall hike that's got interpretive things that are happening to community suppers to whatever else. We work only with nonprofit organization hosts. If you are, and the hosts of the community events are a little bit different than the hosts in the concert events, but I'll talk about that when I talk about specific features of the culture. This year we dealt with, 2009 figures. We had partnerships and contracts with 166 nonprofit organizations to bring off the festival. We have about between 1,700 and 2,000 volunteers every year. That's about 1% of the island's population is out that week volunteering for Celtic Colors. And they don't do it for just a couple of hours a day. Like a lot of people take their holidays then, and they'll come and work 16 hours a day for us. A lot of other people take their holidays so they can participate. Because like any good Celtic party, it goes on at night in terms of the concerts and what happens afterwards, the festival club. So we've had some impacts on the tourism industry that I'll describe a little bit later. I'm going to pass over all that stuff in these next few slides about that was the academic stuff to prove that we can actually call it a multicultural tourism event. I will say that the mission of the Celtic Colors Society is to celebrate and develop the island's living culture, to build relationships across the island and beyond. But we also think it's a social enterprise, and you can read the paper about that argument. But let's go directly to governance and structure, because that was something that was particularly important to us. I go back and I cite the infighting. It wasn't the first time that we tried to have a series of festivals as part of in communities or concerts as an overall festival. In the mid-1980s, there was a big effort for about 5 or 6 years to do this because almost every community had a summer, Sunday afternoon Scottish concert that would start about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, end up about 10 o'clock at night before everybody adjourned to people's houses for the rest of the night for the parties. The kids would be on the stage, in the afternoon, and gradually you'd work up to the big act at the end of the night. But when you saw, as Celtic music became popular in Canada in the late 1990s, people would say, some of those musicians, they're so young. They've achieved success so quickly. They've been playing on public stages since they were 5 years old. They have a lot of experience because music is a very strongly held cultural value on the island. And it's in the Acadian communities, it's in the Scottish and Irish communities and so on. So, what were we going to do when we established the festival to deal with the governance and structure problem? Some of this we stumbled into, some of it we designed deliberately. We stumbled into our contracting situation, but we designed deliberately the Celtic Colours Festival Society in a peculiar way. We designed it so that it would always have very few members. We didn't want it to be open. You leave it open, in our culture at that time, you're going to have coup d'etats, right? Somebody's going to come in just like a political writing, buy a bunch of tickets and, get a buddy elected. So we started out with the original board members, or members of the society, and then from there on, to become a member, to come on our board, you had to be recommended by 2 members of the society and have a majority vote of the board. And so we were very careful about how we picked people. They had to be known as good volunteer workers, respected in the community, a bit of regional distribution around the island. But we haven't, for the most part, let shirkers onto the board or people who are going to cause us trouble. So at any given time, there's never been more than 22 or 23 members of the society. And you'd think that would cause a lot of problems. It did at first, but not in the long run. At first, it was going to cause problems anyway, because the guy who was the head of the Gaelic College had agreed to take on being the chairman of the first board, because 2 local people, Joella Folds and Max MacDonald, who had a lot of experience in the music industry and broadcasting, had a little company that had come up with this idea, and trying it again after a couple of previous failures, to do something of this nature. And when they went to government for some grants, government said, well, they're a private company, we can't give you a grant. Now they give private companies grants all the time. They didn't want to give a cultural event of that nature a grant. But that's okay, because then they went out to organize the society, and Sam, who was the executive director of the Gaelic College, took it on. Well, immediately that called into question by every other Gaelic association on the island. This was a power grab by the Gaelic College. When I was appointed, because I was president of the university then, it must also be a power grab by the university. So there was all of that kind of dynamic that was happening. And we had this rockiness in the early years. We had a fallout with Joella and Max. So for 1 year we had another executive director. That was a very unhappy experience for everybody. So we got Joella and Max back. And we kind of reorganized our focus in terms of having a management committee, because as you can appreciate, part of the board staff tension in that case was you can't trust artists with money, right? They have no concept of how to spend it, et cetera, et cetera. And that's, the traditional kind of view. So we've always been very careful about that business-artistic balance, when in fact, the people have always been extremely responsible who were running it, the artists who were running it. But there were those kinds of little types of war that continued to kind of happen. We went along pretty well then with the management committee and so on until about 6 or 7 years ago. Then there was a kind of major blow-up that was, again, typical, board staff not really communicating well with one another, people being put upon in various kinds of ways. So at that point, I was on the board, but they called me in to be a conflict resolution facilitator. So we did a day of, probing into each other's psyches and coming up with a resolution, as a result of which 2 of the senior people on the board resigned. But they have since been extremely good supporters of the festival and have continued to volunteer. And then a year or so later, the Secretary of Treasury took on the responsibilities for a year or so. And then since then, I've been chair of the board. But I'm hoping to get rid of the job this year. I've had somebody mentoring, that I've been mentoring for about a year, and everybody knows all that, and it's fine with everybody. He's going to be a great chair of the board. But we're not changing the governance structure. Just don't mess with what works. The board meets around the island, and we try to meet with our volunteers at quarterly meetings. In fact, I think we're coming to Shetty Camp sometime early in the winter. And what we will normally do is get them, have a good question and answer session. If there's some problems, we'll try to work out problems. A couple of years ago, we had a